Hi, I'm future Alicia. Welcome to another episode of Crypto Native. Today I talk to Marvin Janssen about his role in bringing the .btc namespace to life and how he went from community member to technical lead at the Stacks Foundation. We talk all about how the Stacks protocol makes Bitcoin programmable and the importance of decentralized identity for users of the internet. I hope you enjoy the conversation. To support Crypto Native, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Hi, Marvin. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. And I wanted to start on Twitter because crypto Twitter is kind of the center of the universe when it comes to crypto in the Web3 world.
Yeah, for better, for worse.
Yeah, for better, for worse, definitely. I can relate to that. And I noticed that my name on Twitter is alicia.eth and yours is marvin.btc. And the .btc extension is very new. And I was wondering if you could tell us your story, because I was shocked when I just discovered this on your Twitter, the background in terms of your relationship to the .btc, but I'd love to hear kind of what the .btc is from you and how that came about.
Sure. Yeah. So it's funny you notice that. We've seen that for a while, where people, they have ENS and have .eth names, and we're in our ecosystem. We're like, well, we want our counterpart to that, so that became .btc amongst others. So where that's coming from is I'm the technical lead at the Stacks Foundation, but before I started out there, I was already a long-term enough community member in the Stacks ecosystem. So Stacks is a blockchain that anchors itself to Bitcoin. So it utilizes Bitcoin security. One of the features that Stacks brings to the ecosystem is that it enables smart contracts that have access to the base chains, and in this case Bitcoin. So it can read Bitcoin state. So naturally, since Bitcoin is so fundamental to the ecosystem, we wanted a namespace to be able to express that, and that's where .btc comes from. So BNS is really the counterpart to ENS on Ethereum. So you can register names; these are globally unique. You can transfer these out, and you can own these names, and these names bind to a Stacks address, and thereby also a Bitcoin address. With the right tooling or the right wallets, the way you can send Ether to alicia.eth, you could send me Bitcoin or Stacks to marvin.btc. The way this came about it's quite interesting, where this was a concept that Munib Ali came up with. Munib Ali is the CEO of Hero PBC. They're one of the players in the ecosystem, and they build developer tooling for Stacks. So his idea was like, we need that counterpart. We want those names to be out there and to be used in that same way. And he asked me to be one of the people working on that. So I built that application to register and manage .btc names. And I should say, so btc.us, if you really, when it really comes down to it, is nothing more than an interface to the BNS system. So on the Stacks chain, BNS is expressed as a smart contract. It manages those names. It does that by means of you have different namespaces. So BTC is one of the namespaces. There's also others like .id for identities, .stx, and basically anyone can register any namespace there. So BTC is one of them. And the app just makes that experience easier and nicer to register one of those names. So that's the background of it.
Wow, that's incredible. I feel like Christmas shopping for fans of BTC just got a lot easier if you can just. But don't you think a .btc extension would be just like the best gift?
I would believe so, and it was funny because we planned this to sort of be a soft launch in the community first, like, hey, here's this amazing new thing, and then also provide that as a gateway or an introduction to the ecosystem, where it's like, hey, did you know that DeFi on Bitcoin is now possible because Clarity and Stacks makes Bitcoin programmable. so we intended this as a soft launch first, and then Manip decided to spend one tweet on this and be like, hey, you can now buy these .btc names. And what happened was that we saw like 3 registrations per second coming in, 3 orders per second.
3 per second.
Yeah. At the height, it was like 2 to 3 per second, and the application was originally rated for, say, a few per minute. So I'll explain that a little bit more why that was an issue, because you can go to btc.us and register a name using Stacks directly. So there's a browser plugin called just the Stacks web extension or the Stacks web wallet, and this is like the MetaMask of Stacks. So you use that to interact with dApps and whatnot. So if you do it directly with the web wallet, you will initiate those contract calls yourself. So you directly purchase the name. But as a convenience feature, we also added a payment processor so that people that don't have Stacks yet can buy a name using their credit cards or using Bitcoin or something like that. And then a payment processor would kind of fill in that gap for now. So it would clear the payment, and then once it's cleared, it would queue the name and it would purchase it. You see the bird shows up. So this is my bird. She loves smart contracts and stuff. So anytime we talk about these topics, she'll be here and be a partner in these ventures. So anyway, so that's why we also had a payment processor on the back end running to be able to service those customers. And like I said, so that backend was rated for just a few per minute, and we started seeing 3 per second. So the system couldn't keep up. There was such an overwhelming demand that it led to a bunch of issues. We've been working through those, and everyone's happy. But it was very cool to see the amount of interest that was generated just by Manip sending out a single tweet. So that's very exciting. And yeah, if you do look around on crypto Twitter, you'll find the odd .btc name here and there.
Yeah, I think that what was really surprising to me was just the fact that I think that the domain extensions are, with Ethereum as the domain extension being an NFT, it's such a great kind of first experience for people to get exposure to that without knowing that they're getting exposure. Yeah. And then I suppose you go one step further in adding the payment processor as well, which makes it even more accessible. Because it can be even just that hurdle to downloading a wallet can be really significant. And so, but that you want your .btc address. So yeah, that's really amazing. And so this is the first instance where I kind of really internalized that Stacks makes Bitcoin programmable. And that seems like a huge revelation because I feel like, the programmable aspect of Ethereum is kind of what makes Ethereum different. And, no one can deny how important Bitcoin is to the ecosystem and how foundational it is. And so adding this functionality to Bitcoin, it just seems kind of mind-blowing. Can you just walk me through maybe how Stacks does that in terms of the chains? Because I have like a very high level understanding, but if you could just maybe simplify it for me so I can really understand. For sure. Yeah. And I'll preface this by saying that the founding members behind Stacks, when it was still called Blockstack, it goes back a long time. Like there's this picture where one of the core research engineers, Jude Nelson, there's a picture where he's sitting next to Vitalik and he's explaining some blockchain thing. So it's honestly amazing how early they were. It just took a long time to really get to where it is right now. But just the people behind this, it's amazing and very, very interesting. So I also want to say, obviously, Stacks is not unique in the fact that it wants to make Bitcoin programmable. There's a few other projects that are also doing this or trying to do this, and they do this in a few different ways. So I'm obviously not an expert on those projects, but I can shed some light onto how Stacks is doing this, because sometimes there are people that have a misconception about how it works, or they say, "Oh, Stacks is a side chain," or something like that, which is not the case. So on a high level, the way Stacks works is
quite literally anchors itself to the Bitcoin chain. And there's a few reasons for that. So first of all, Bitcoin has a proof of work, is by far the most secure chain in existence, right? And is very resistant to change. So we have seen this. It's battle tested, right? Like there's been the block size debate and a bunch of other debates, and you kind of see like where Bitcoin ends up. So that's a really good property, right? But as you said, like making Bitcoin programmable, and it's kind of a step that arguably is necessary, because there's just such a huge amount of capital locked up in Bitcoin that could be made accessible by doing something like this. So Ethereum pioneered a lot of things, and that's also people learned a lot from that and what happened there. So the way Stacks works is that it anchors itself to Bitcoin by having certain commitments made on the Bitcoin chain. So Stacks is its own layer 1 blockchain, so it runs separately. So it like I said, it's not a side chain or anything like that, but it uses Bitcoin for its finality, if you will. So Stacks, they mine their own blocks, and then these block hashes are committed to Bitcoin in a special field, so that every hash there is verifiably on the Bitcoin chain. And this concept is built out in the consensus mechanism, which is unique to Stacks, called proof of transfer, where participants have to do certain actions to be able to mint new blocks and move the chain forward. And that brings about a few very interesting side properties. So as I said before, since Stacks anchors itself to Bitcoin, it also inherits the security of Bitcoin. So given that Bitcoin is so resistant to change, Stacks inherits those properties. But of course, another property it inherits is also the block time. So Stacks transactions get anchored to Bitcoin blocks, but if a block happens every 10 minutes, that means that we have the same block time. Stacks solved this by introducing the concept of micro blocks, which are sort of mined in between, and then at every certain amount of blocks, you have what is called an anchor block, which is then anchored to Bitcoin. So that would allow you to be able to do quicker smart contract transactions, and you don't have to wait, say, 10 minutes for that to finalize on the main chain. But this is also up to app developers. So you can either wait for an anchor block to happen to be absolutely 100% sure, or you can be okay with anchor blocks. So I'll really quickly touch upon the consensus mechanism then, because that's what ties this all together. So in order to mint new stacks as a miner, you have to commit the base layer token to the network. So in this case, that's Bitcoin. So what it effectively means is that if you want to be a miner on the Stacks chain, you have to spend Bitcoin in order to be considered the next leader to be able to produce a block. And this is done by sortition weighted by how much Bitcoin you commit to the network. So you have to spend something of value in order to be able to consider to mine a block. So, similar to proof of work, where you have to spend energy in order to have a chance of finding the next Bitcoin block. For Stacks, you have to spend the base token in order to have the chance of minting new stacks. Then on the other side, so the question is then like, well, where do the Bitcoin go that you spend in mining? Well, those coins go to the people holding Stacks tokens. So if you're someone who holds Stacks tokens, what you can do is lock up those tokens in a process called stacking. And what you do when you stack is you issue a vote of confidence for the canonical chain tip in the Stacks chain. The miners can then use those votes, and they reward the stackers by sending Bitcoin to them. And this is all encoded also as a smart contract on the Stacks chain. So this is called the POX contract. And you signal your reward address for Bitcoin, and the miners will then transfer Bitcoins. And the proof of that transfer, that's why it's called proof of transfer, is what gives them a lottery ticket, if you will, to become the next leader and create the next block.
Wow. Okay. So I really think it's interesting how you use the like you use the protocol to create the protocol. That's such a that's really interesting. And then just this idea of proof of transfer. Yeah. So the idea is then that who is the ideal miner, and who is the ideal like stacker? So is it like on the stacking side, is it for just like retail holders of Bitcoin that would then, yeah, can you maybe just walk me through that?
So anyone can really do this on either side. So because with Bitcoin, you know, the proof of work is already being done by the Bitcoin miners. So we don't want to basically be wasteful and start our own proof of work chain. You know, there's lots of issues with that, disregarding the energy usage. So a mantra that you kind of hear in the ecosystem, and I'm not sure who came up with it, but they say like if Bitcoin is gold or mining gold, then mining stacks is turning the gold into jewelry. So you already have your commodity that the work has gone in. So now you can just take it and turn it into something pretty with added value. But so that means that you don't need to run a Bitcoin miner to be able to be considered for the mining process in stacks, because what you got to do is you got to commit Bitcoin. So by sending Bitcoin to these addresses and participating in the consensus mechanism, that's how you mine. The stackers, on the other hand, there's no particular group where you'd expect in the stacks. Anyone can do this. I can do this. You can do this. And the stacking locked up, there's no risk of those tokens being slashed, because this is not proof of stake. You're voting for a chain tip, and to support your vote, you lock up your tokens, but you get the tokens remain in your wallet. They never leave your wallet. There's a side note to that, where there is a limited amount of Bitcoin reward addresses that can exist at any given point. So there's 4,000 what we call reward slots. So that means that the minimum amount of stacks required to be able to be eligible for a single reward slot is a function of how many stacks in circulation, you know, how much is being stacked. So this changes. There's a website that explains this like beautifully, called Stacking Club. Yeah, stacking.club.
And all of the stacks, like stacks websites and stack related websites, are so beautiful.
Yeah.
Some of the best looking websites in Web3, I think.
Yeah, they did a rebranding, and it's absolutely gorgeous what they made. And there's some of the core developers, like the person Thomas that made stacking.club. It's absolutely gorgeous the way he made it. But yeah, so that changes a bit. So I think the minimum of amount of stacks required is hovering around 90,000 to 100,000 stacks. So given the fact that I think stacks was $1 at some point and has also hit $3, that's a considerable amount of money to be able to stack. So does that mean it's prohibitive? No, because there's a concept of stacking pools, which are basically like mining pools. So even if you have 100 stacks, you can find a mining pool, and you can delegate your voting power, if you will, to that mining pool, and then they will vote on your behalf. And that's a really great solution, because then, just like a mining pool, however how many reward addresses they get, reward slots they get a Bitcoin reward, which they then distribute in different ways. So there's a few mining pools, a few stacking pools on exchanges, and there's also a few community run pools. Some of those are really popular. So one of the big ones is called Freaker Pool. And he has a really attractive model where people can just stack and everyone can participate. And I think you need like 100 to get started. So this generates a really nice reward. And if you look at the APY, it's been hovering between like 8 and 12%. So risk-free, getting a return in Bitcoin is very interesting.
Very interesting. I feel like that would check a lot of boxes for people who, say in the Bitcoin community, who are watching kind of, DeFi just dominate crypto Twitter. And this is so interesting, and I think a really incredible innovation. And I think just as well the way that Stacks makes it so accessible. It seems like all of those things that you just talked about, I feel like they are individual islands maybe in other ecosystems that you have to wrap your head around, but here it's just like all wrapped into kind of one thing and then just like tangents off that.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
So that's really incredible. Okay, cool. And so you, in terms of working with Stacks to develop that was, and you said that, did Munib have the idea, and is there like a story behind how that came about, from going from like a community member to working on the .btc, and then also just like being involved in the ecosystem with Stacks?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's actually a few stories that run in parallel there. So I've been a long-term community member. So I really want to stress I'm not one of the core founders or one of the first core members. Those people are still all around, by the way, and extremely great people to work with. But yeah, I started as a community member, and the way I found Blockstack, and I believe it was 2017, was that. I've been working in this space for a while, so I'm a smart contract engineer. I think I first got into crypto in like maybe 2014. It's been a while, and I've seen different projects. So so naturally you're kind of on the lookout to see what is going on in the space in general, right? And I came across Stacks at the time called Blockstack, and it really intrigued me what they were advertising or what they were talking about on the website. So they said, here, download this browser to the decentralized internet. I think that's what it said. And I remember kind of the graphic, and they had these little apps, and it looked kind of like home screen-esque, like you'd see on your phone. And yeah, it really intrigued me. And it's like, yeah, newsletter, drop your email here. And that's really how that got started. And I just kept following along with it. And then you're always wary of projects that make these grand claims, because I don't have to tell you that there's lots of scams and fake projects going about where they release a white paper promising something amazing, and they do an ICO, get a bunch of money, and disappear from the face of the earth, right? So people are just naturally skeptical, and so was I. Side note, I do have to say, like, they eventually did an ICO, and I participated in that with a little bit, because I was like, yeah, I can see this going somewhere. So they did convince me, but yeah, obviously you're skeptical. So that's really how I got started. I was a community member, so I was just one of the other developers that were just working on applications and trying to figure out like how these technologies work and what direction it is going. And I was just really attracted by the promises of the Stacks chain. So the idea of a decentralized internet where users own their data again. So, because this is not the case on the internet these days. So you have these mega corporations like Facebook and Google and a bunch of other corporations we might not even know about that have so much personal data about us. And we don't own that data. They do what they want with it. And, as you know, like that has been expressed in movies like The Social Dilemma. It's not always very ethical what they do with all that personal information. So the promise of having a user-owned internet where you control who gets access to your data and you control your identities was just very, very attractive. So as a member, I worked on a few different projects here and there, and I got very involved in that. And at some point, I'm interested in security, so I started analyzing the security of some of these applications and design of it. And I found some information. I wrote a blog post about that, and that generated a bunch of buzz. And suddenly, everyone was talking about that in the ecosystem. So that was kind of fun. And this led me on the path of working on a new type of hardware wallet that we're calling the Rider. So we're building a hardware wallet that's really focused on the decentralized identity aspect of things. And the Stacks Foundation, so the foundation I now work for, initially funded me as a community member to actually pursue this project and fund part of the R&D. So these days, that's a company that I'm part of, and yeah, we're trying to build a completely open decentralized identity hardware wallet. So that's the first part of the story. What happened in parallel was that I felt this real passion to be involved more. So I came across a tweet on crypto Twitter somewhere, and they talked about like, hey, you know, if you want your dream job or your dream project, here are some ways to go about that. And it was a little bold. It just said like, you know, you should just skip HR and skip the hiring process and looking at the career space. You should just contact the CEO directly and just ask them for something and you know, express that. And so Manip Ali, the CEO, one of the co-founders of Stacks, Blockstack at the time, and now Hero PBC. I had some very brief interactions with him before because and I think this is also very telling of the ecosystem that unlike other crypto projects, even the co-founders and like someone like Manip, who's obviously very busy, they still engage with the community quite a bit. So he's very accessible, and you could hop into Discord, and there's decent odds that you get to speak to him directly over there, which is very cool. So I already had some interactions, and I decided like, hey, I'm just going to send him an email and say like, hey, I'd love to just do something for you guys. And next week I had a call with him, and he said like, hey, we have this idea of making this BTC namespace. Do you want to help out with that? And that's how that got started.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's the second part of it. And then the third part in a few sentences was that I like providing technical support, and I've been a teacher at a private school teaching technological subjects, and I even taught some Stacks at the time as well. And the Stacks Foundation has the grants program, and that's how they funded my writer project. And they had a need for someone more technical on the grant committee team so that they could assess these grant proposals from a technical standpoint. And I was lucky enough that they reached out to me and asked me like, hey, would you want to do this? So that's how I started out with the foundation, and then eventually they had an opening for a technical lead position, and one thing led to another, and there you are. So I've been with them for a couple of months now doing that as well. I know that's a lot of information, but that's the 3-part story.
That is so incredible. I love, DMing a CEO to get a job. That's kind of like the ultimate crypto Twitter story. In terms
I can recommend it, and it doesn't. It might not have even been crypto Twitter, but to everyone listening to this, if you have this amazing idea and you're passionate about a product, you're a user of the product, you should just track down CEO's email address and just send him an email.
Yeah, that's great advice. And and then also just with Rider, the hardware wallet, and then talking about user-owned data and a user-owned internet, I was just thinking when you were talking about Facebook and Google that I know it's terrible that they own all of my data and they use it how they want, but I kind of can't get past this first hurdle, which is that they make me create an identity that is determined by them. So with whether it's my full legal name.
Yeah.
In crypto, people are starting to obviously, especially with Satoshi Nakamoto, you can't go past the idea of pseudonyms and anonymity. So just this idea that you're like, I have a real aversion now to signing up to anything that makes me use my full legal name.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if we could just like talk about the importance of what it means to really own your identity.
I think you phrased this brilliantly. I have the exact same version. I've always had that. And, I say that as a bit of a hypocrite because, I do have a Twitter account that shows my real name, and my Twitter username is my first and last name. But it's just interesting to kind of see this shift, like growing up with the internet where Google and YouTube, they all used to be about that. Don't use your real information on the internet, right? That's what everyone always said. That's what you were taught, and that's what they taught children. Don't use your real information. Don't just post your photos. Google's mantra used to be, don't be evil, right? They dropped that somewhere along the line. Don't know when that happened. Funny side note as well is that when Blockstack got started out, they used the mantra can't be evil. So instead of don't be evil as like making it a choice, it's like it's already preemptively not possible to be evil. But anyway, and it's weird how that shifted. YouTube used to be about pseudonyms, and now they prompt you to fill in your full legal name, your email address, your phone number, usually,
the phone number.
And then they say, oh, it's just for verification, so you're not a bot, but no, everybody knows it's not about that. And then if there's some issue with this content might be considered adult content on YouTube, or for whatever reason, you have to verify your age, and then suddenly they're asking for your ID, and it's going crazy. Like you say, like they create an identity for you that is not necessarily the way you want to create it. And then once that is also done, they try to get you to stick to that singular identity, right? So you create a Google account, and you're going to use that single Google account for all Google platforms. They're bringing everything together. And I'm pretty sure that in the terms of use, they would even state that you're only allowed to have one account. So you cannot have multiple accounts. Like, I'm sure that's in there. Whether it's enforced, I don't know, but I do, you see those things. So you never really own your identity. And it's kind of weird. Like, we're approaching this internet where it's like a digital equivalent of a passport. And also passports themselves are very recent inventions. I think like they were invented like maybe like 200 years, 150 years ago or something like that in France, I believe. It's not something that people have been using or had for a while. And this is kind of the same thing, right? It's a government mandated identity that they just want to make sure that you have your singular point, like a social insurance number or whatnot. So yeah, to own your identity is really the next step. And I think the only real way by which you can get this done is by crypto. So you can have a decentralized identity that you own, and you can design as you see fit. And another aspect, of course, is that you can create as many separate identities or pseudonyms as you wish. So you can sign into every single application with a different identity if you so desire, which right now the internet is moving in the opposite direction, right? So many platforms, they just add a sign in with Google or a sign in with Twitter button, because that's easy for them, and then you add something to your social graph on Facebook, right, to your shadow profile that they can use. So yeah, it's a very interesting shift. So with Rider, that's just one of the ways in which that is expressed, that Stacks already has a very nice decentralized identity system that allows you to sign into dApps and connect that to a meaningful name. So that could be a .btc name, but it could be anything, right? You don't have to. You can just leave it as an address, or you can drop and never use it again. But there's also a few other emerging standards. So the European Union is actually working on a DID standard, and there's a few other players in just the space in general. So it's very interesting to explore these concepts. And then the difference with a DID, of course, is that you can sign in, but you can also revoke it at any point in time. And by means of cryptography, once you sign out, there's no way for the application to really do anything about that.
Right. And so DID, is it digital ID?
Decentralized identity.
Oh, decentralized ID.
DID, yeah.
Okay. And so, I wonder, it's funny even just thinking about, the terminology and like the language that we use in the space. Yeah. And so wallets, and how in the physical world, most people only have one wallet, but, just in the decentralized web space, getting used to having multiple wallets, which I still think is something that people who come into the space might not be aware of, because, they're just doing a one-to-one transfer, and like you said, you have like one Google identity or one Facebook identity that you sign in.
People are conditioned that way. You have one wallet, which is one identity. Yeah.
Yes, and so that's really interesting. And so, what do you think is how does the ability to own our identity and to use a different wallet address for different dApps, or however you're interacting on the web, how does that change the outcomes and like kind of how we exist in that digital world, do you think?
That's of course a very broad question. There's many implications to it, but I think like if I want to answer this in fewer words, I would say like it will pave the way to create more meaningful or authentic interaction between people, because I think not owning your identity obviously is very controlling. Like there's only a specific way in which you can express yourself, right? And you might have conflicting interests that you don't necessarily want connected online, right? Like if I Google your name or you Google my name, you don't want everything just to come up. Like maybe you have some particular interest that you'd love to pursue under a pseudonym, but you cannot meaningfully do that right now. So I think it will recreate a lot of authentic experience. But the other aspect of that is that these platforms that we see right now that are sort of the how should I put this? That kind of have control over the main identities, so Twitter and Facebook and Google and whatnot. That really creates a situation where the identity that you have, the information about yourself, the personal information, that's the product for these companies, right? So I don't think that any of these platforms, therefore, by default cannot give you a genuine experience because they want to sell you something, right? And they want to keep you engaged on these platforms. So and this is an ongoing social experiment, in my opinion, that we're only starting to see the effects of right now, right? I think the world is becoming more polarized. If you see what happens during political elections or a contentious topic or something like that, people seem to almost lose the ability to be able to reconcile or be able to listen to an opposing idea to their own. And I think part of that is because of these social media platforms, because they want to keep you engaged. They want to keep you on the platform, right? When you're on YouTube, you're watching videos, they want to keep you there as long as possible and then serve you ads in between. So they have very sophisticated algorithms based on all this personal information that they've gathered to show you stuff that you're interested in, that you agree with, right? If you'd go on YouTube and every single next video that you see is something that is absolutely at odds with your personal values, you're not really going to be on the platform for long, right? So it's really not a genuine experience. Like, people are being manipulated, they're being tricked. Those are honestly the right words for it. And they might not even know it. Whereas with a decentralized model, that's all different, because then the connection becomes central. So you have meaningful interactions with people, and the business models will be different. So earlier we talked about stacking, but that's just on the consensus level. So in Stacks, you can actually spin up an app chain, if you will, with its own token, and you can stack the token to earn, say, a base Stacks reward or something like that. So with these things, and this is a whole different topic again, right? But you'd be able to add value to the system without selling your personal information. And you could do that by either locking up a token or by having an ongoing microtransaction that pays for the time, right? Or you see tipping models that are becoming more decentralized. So, I read your blog post, I like it, or I listen to your podcast, I like it, and I can give an upvote, and that transfers a minute amount of tokens to your wallet. I think that will change the way that we interact online, but also to each other. So I think that there will be a move where actually a lot more stuff will be happening offline instead of online.
You think there'll be a lot more stuff happening offline because of the fact that we can kind of be whole, like our whole selves online, and then that will translate to I guess I should have phrased that a bit more carefully. I think that, obviously the online component is going to be there, but we'll have meaningful face-to-face physical interactions that have a crypto underpinning, say, for example. So, we go out to a restaurant and we balance that out by a crypto transaction that sort of happens, but it's abstracted away, right? And then our interaction, you go out and meet someone, you can do that based on a pseudonym, and I don't know what that's going to look like. That's a futurist talk, but you kind of get the feeling. So I think it'll move in that direction a little bit more, and once digital wallets or hardware wallets become more acceptable, you'll see things like that happening more. It's kind of like the same way in which having a mobile phone, a smartphone, revolutionized the way that you are. Your stance towards the world and the world towards you. Yeah, I think it's kind of funny to think about how recent, mobile phone technology is, and how it wasn't long ago that, mobile phones were these huge brick things that didn't fit in our pockets. And so just this idea of going through, I know I've heard, on some other podcasts, people comparing blockchain technology and the evolution that is going to happen to mobile technology. And just, with reference to us being at the very beginning still, and not knowing how that plays out, what the blockchain version of equivalent of an iPhone is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's what we're wondering about too. It's kind of that step from the brick phone to Nokia, and then Nokia made it accessible to everyone, and then suddenly we went from Nokia to iPhone, and that changed the game again.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking while you were talking, do you think there's a way for advertising to not be evil, or is it just a business model that is like fundamentally exploitative and it just needs to be redesigned? Because I imagine that, say you're in a community and under whatever name you like, and you're participating, I often feel like when I follow people online, say I'm reading a blog, listening to a podcast, and if they were to recommend, like genuinely recommend products or experiences or tools, I would be interested, A, in hearing about the recommendation, and B, probably, being open to purchasing it. And that's really different to, like you said, YouTube knowing my personal preferences and feeding me content so that I stay online and they can feed me ads. So I wonder, do you have any thoughts on how that advertising model might work in a decentralized web? I know this is really random and off topic, but
I might have some ideas, but what direction it's going to take, only time will tell. I think I'll go back to the fact that when it comes to legacy money, it's easy to spend, but there are still specific hurdles that you're going to deal with, and there's also there's a bar to entry, right? Not everybody is banked, not everyone has access to financial infrastructure and things like that, and that also shapes the way we interact with these kinds of things. So I find advertising marketing a really, really tough subject. On the one hand, I dislike it immensely for the points that you say, it's not necessarily something that I'm genuinely interested in. They just want to sell something to me, and based on some machine learning stuff, they concluded that, I might be interested in this particular product. And even if I might be, I still find that a disingenuous kind of interaction that I would have with a platform. Is I wasn't asking for that. When I go on Twitter, I'm not asking to see an ad about Microsoft Azure, about some cloud service. I don't care. That's not why I went to the platform in the first place. So I think you're onto something when you say that you'll have more genuine recommendations or things that people are using. I can see that being a way. So again, if you see some meaningful content, just by the fact of you reading it or accessing it, that generates a microtransaction, right? And this is really maybe futurist stuff again, but I can imagine reading an article, and the more you read of it, the more you kind of show that you like it, and the more you thus contribute to the author of that article. I can see that being a way. So newspapers could adopt a model like that, where the more people read, there's a mechanism where the more they will contribute for it in forms of an open microtransaction, so like a lightning channel or something like that. And you could extend these kinds of things to different platforms and different models. And then, of course, also a thing that I really like is that idea of sponsorship, where you believe in a certain product, and that makes you sort of subscribe to whatever it is they're doing. So like Patreon, for example. They explore that and wildly successful, and now different platforms are doing that. So you can subscribe to someone on YouTube. On Twitch you have a similar mechanism, I don't know what it's called, and you can tip people. So if they do something particular, I think that's the way it could go. But what it exactly is going to look like, I'm not able to say.
Yeah, I'm interested in getting your futurist takes, because as someone with the technical knowledge, it's definitely interesting for me, because I'm just sitting here not knowing how to build anything and and guessing what the future might look like. But hearing what you think is interesting to me, because I imagine that in your mind, you're also thinking about how these things, could be
I
built
think
out.
we'll see a reimagining of what value really is. So like money is an expression of values, much like many other things. And when you write an article, there's a certain value in that, but it's subjective to different people. And I think crypto enables us to really have better value discovery in things necessarily. So like people, for instance, they discuss like, is there a road tax when you have a car? Do you pay tax on that? Do you use a toll system where when you go on the highway you have to pay toll? Maybe in the future you'll have something like for every centimeter that the car moves, it incurs a microtransaction, but it's kind of like an ongoing thing. So instead of just saying like, here's $5 and here's another $5, it's more like a faucet that opens and closes and has a different amount of token going through it at different times. So I can see it going in a direction like that.
Yeah, cool. And so I noticed that you do like a decent amount of writing with Medium, and you so effectively kind of tell your story and share your thoughts and your experience. And I think that writing and kind of content creation as a form of education is really fundamental to so many people's experience in this space. And I wonder just like what your experience has been with like content creation and education more broadly. You mentioned that you were teaching kind of blockchain related subjects. And so, what does that education space look like for you? How's it been? And what are you excited about?
Medium is indeed one expression I had, and then just a platform where I chose indeed to get that content out there. That content was specific to the question of DIDs and security principles, and sort of to chronicle the progress that we've been making with writers. So recently we've taken that to a newsletter, and we have a blog on the website now. But that's one expression of it. But I think it's tough to say, because I know like some people, they do content creation to make a living, which is not the case for me. So when I create this content, it's sort of to elucidate something that I'm already working on that might make my living. So I think that already makes that a little bit different. But it is something that I love because I also have a passion for education. I used to be a teacher at a private school, and we taught all sorts of technical subjects. And I'm happy to say that I'm continuing that at the Stacks Foundation as well. So we're currently working on a educational package to learn more about the Stacks ecosystem, but also how you can work in the ecosystem. So, how do you write smart contracts? What are best principles there? What does all this look like? And of course, in particular to our smart contract language called Clarity. And what we want to do is it's basically a response to a few things that we've noticed in our ecosystem, but also the crypto space in whole, is that it's and I know this is getting better. So there's many different parties working on this, but education is often missing, or at least the right type of education is missing. And a lot of people are very interested in becoming involved or working in this kind of field, or they simply have the same ideology, the same overarching philosophy about what it means to own your own data, your information, and they just don't know where to get started. So that's hopefully where we're going to provide that with the course. So we're still working on that, but it's been very exciting so far. And actually, we have this talk on an interesting day, because just this morning we kicked off a summer school program with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, where we'll have groups of students building dApps over the coming few weeks. And we're going to use what we learned there and the content that we generate for the full Stacks and Clarity course that we're working on.
Wow, I can imagine that would already be the highlight of their of like a university experience to get exposure to building dApps with the Stacks ecosystem. Wow, that's really amazing. And so when you create a course, because you have like experience in maybe a traditional educational institution, and then you're kind of creating a course from scratch, what does that process look like? Is it that different in terms of like what works in traditional education works with, blockchain education or technical education? Or can you kind of implement some things that you always thought this is how it should be taught?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting intersection, and this is a learning process for all of us. So like you say, like there is a part like what works in traditional education where you're face to face, and that's something I really enjoy. I think that really creates a lot of group cohesion, and you can sit together, you can spar, think about ideas, and so I find that really valuable. And to translate that, of course, to online is a different story. So yeah, like the first traditional education. Then like what works there, what works online, and then also there's another circle in this Venn diagram like blockchain education, which of course looks different yet again, because it's sort of like a layered system where you first you got to kind of know what blockchain actually is and what it's useful for before you can actually meaningfully, I think, work with it or work on blockchain technology. So we're still trying this out, and it's funny since earlier you mentioned we met through kernel, but we were actually inspired by the kernel model as well, where since this is online, we have to stress the group cohesion and the communication between participants, because this is an online course. So this is going to happen through an online meeting like Zoom. So once these people turn off their computer or leave the Zoom meeting, they're by themselves again wherever they are. So we need something that will keep that interaction going. So we came up with a model that we think makes sense. We'll do interactive workshops where people can ask questions. We'll do fireside chats where we discuss like overarching topics like what blockchain is and how Bitcoin got to where it is, what is DeFi, these kinds of topics. And then in between, we'll have them interact because they will work in groups and work towards a project that is part, like say a homework assignment, and part something that they got to think about and how they're going to give shape to it. So even though they might have never met each other and it's all online, we hope that this will create a meaningful bond between all the participants.
Yeah. And so that sounds like such a great all-encompassing starting point. I just realized when you said that you have to, like, people have to understand blockchain technology before, you can start writing smart contracts with clarity. And I realized, like, yeah, I guess I've never thought about that. When you pick up a language in the Web 2 world, you just like pick up the language and you just keep building on, whatever Web 2 infrastructure there is, essentially. And I think it's really interesting because I almost feel like we're not cognizant of the ideology that underpins the technology in Web 2, whereas with Web 3, it is the starting point. There is basically no way you can get to the technical component without going through the the ideology and philosophy and that doing that groundwork.
That's usually what drives people or what interests them in the first place. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And also coming from teaching Web 2 subjects, it's I always like to take a foundational approach. So, before we jump into anything specific, I'm going to explain like why is it the way it is, because I think that's important. And it's also me personally, that's the way I understand things. I know that's not everyone, but I've had success with this approach. So that's what I want to try here as well. And yeah, you're right. Like Web 2, you can pick something up and start building. But if you don't really understand the client server model, for example, then you might have a bad time, or you might design something that seems to work but doesn't scale, or something like that. And of course, the same holds true for blockchain. And that isn't to say that you need to be a blockchain expert and understand the cryptography and understand how consensus works and be able to build a blockchain before you can work with it. But you at least have to get the principles right. Like, and then the question is like, what do you actually do in a blockchain? Do you need a blockchain for your application? Because it being a hot item right now, everyone will kind of jump to that. Like, hey, let's do blockchain. Let's bring blockchain into this equation. And it's like, well, do you really need it? Because it's slow, it's expensive. What are you actually wanting to do with this? You want to solve the issue of trust or something like that, right? There needs to be a meaningful reason. And then once you have that understanding, it's like which part of your application is doing something on chain and which part is off chain, right? Because you'll always have a component like that. You won't have people interacting with a contract directly in a command line writing transactions by hand or something like that. So there's going to be like two components to that, and what makes that a dApp and what part goes where. Basically that's it.
Yeah. And so in your mind, how long does a course like that take to go through? If you're a student, like how long have you made the course?
Yeah,
because it sounds like I'm like, wow, this sounds like a one-stop shop for kind of like going from 0 to 1.
We hope that for it to be that way. I'll say first. So the summer program is sort of a distilled version of the course that we have in mind. So this is going to run for 6 weeks. They'll have 6 workshop sessions and then 6 optional sessions. And maybe some stuff around that, so they'll get some homework and things to work on. And we're kind of going to see like how fast we can progress through that. So to give you an example, what we want the students to build or have built at the end of this course is an NFT marketplace. So that sounds pretty intense, right?
It does.
So we focus on the clarity. So like, how can you get this done, and how can you get these token transfers in, and like, how does that go together? And then how do you attach it to a nice front end that will display some information about that, and what part goes there. So that's that aspect. But we think the overall course, what we're working on right now, will have like a set of modules where there's a module 0, sort of introductory, what we talked about before. So you have an understanding of why things are the way they are. Then we have a first module where you're going to build stuff. So you're going to do the front end stuff, you're going to do clarity. And then a final module where they really become experts. So you start brainstorming and coming up with your own ideas and exploring what exists in the ecosystem. So these modules, like I kind of envision those to be maybe also 6 weeks a piece. And then we will, the idea is for that to be published online so people can work through that at their own time. And then we'll have a few guided sessions where, again, just like kernel or something like this, where you can have group cohesion and solve these issues together and work on that together.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see this education space unfold with blockchain. I see kind of outside of the blockchain industry how early childhood education and kind of K-12, I think it's called in the US, education is changing. And it's really exciting to me. And I think that kernel was kind of my first interaction with what like an adult version of, say, synthesis school or primer might look like. And, I think that those, when I first came across those two options for kids, I was just like, wow, that sounds incredible. I wish I was 6 and I could do this all again, because I would absolutely do that. And for me, though, I feel like this blockchain space is kind of giving adults, I guess, and I'm sure some kids as well, an opportunity to have that educational experience, which is, I guess, much more digitally native as well. And in large part because the content, like what you're learning, is digital. And I think about, I don't know enough to go into this, but the origins of universities, and kind of maybe not the German university, but I don't know if it was in other parts of Europe or in the US, kind of more philosophy based university, which doesn't really translate well to maybe learning a smart contract, how to write smart contracts. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And what are your kind of go-to when you have to learn about things? How do you go about it? Like, what is the mental model that you use when you are first exposed to something and going and getting like a better understanding of it?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm a visual learner, so I learn by example. And that's also something that I try to translate into sessions when I teach. So when it comes to clarity, I have a section called Clarity by Example, where I provide a bunch of clarity contracts. And I say like, well, these are considered good contracts by a bunch of people who are heavyweights in the space, and have them analyze and explain the principles behind that, because that's also the way I learned. So when I started out with stacks, of course, there's documentation available, and that works for some people. And every now and then a screencast is nice. But I just want to see how it's done. And that's how I learn. But then where I run into issues is usually that's all there is. So, for example, when it came to Writer, I had to reinvent the block stack authentication mechanism in a hardware product that didn't exist. The only way for me to do that was just to basically reverse engineer it and read the code and figure out like how it goes together and try to replicate it in the device, which I was successful, but that's also because I've been a developer for a while that you'll be able to do things like that. So I think having a visual aid and having that interactive is very important. So that's one of the things that I'm focusing on also with the Clarity educational package that we're working on, is to have a great tool that will kind of show you exactly what is going on, so that when you get some of these sample contracts, you can see how that goes together, and there'll be aids to explain why things are the way they are.
Yeah, that's funny. That always bothered me about like my high school education, which was in particular, I feel like, scarred for life from maths, where you, like, a teacher wouldn't show you the answer or like the correct formula because you had to get to it on your own, without understanding that it would help if I could just see the answer. I wasn't trying to cheat or take a shortcut. It's just that I understand, maybe also like you, by going to the end and then working back to the start.
Yeah.
But maybe
I think that hits the nail on the head as well. And also that just reminded me of my high school experience as well, in a long forgotten past, where the opposite, the other side of the coin there, where they just present you with this formula and they say, here you go, memorize this, that's the way it is. And as a high school kid, I was like, why? I don't get it. And I could never remember it because I just couldn't reason the way, like it didn't click for me. And then when I had a different teacher who showed me how the formula was derived, I might not necessarily know, because then you enter a realm of mathematics or physics that might not necessarily be appropriate for the school I was in. But just the fact that he kind of showed where it came from actually allowed me to remember it, and I could kind of see why it was the way it was. And that just always stuck with me to approach things that way, where you can explain the underlying concepts, and you don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but by just having that sort of reference, it's not just this singular thing like, here you go, this is the way it is, and you just got to accept that and try to memorize it.
Yeah, it's interesting, just this idea that like narratives are important, not only kind of in a cultural sense, but also with technical understanding, that there is still a place for like a narrative to resonate in a way that a purely technical explanation doesn't.
And then having an online-centric education really gives you access to a whole new medium and a way to do that, right? So if we talk about conventional schooling, you're in a classroom, a teacher is explaining something, presenting something on a screen or writing something on the board. It's very interactive on like a verbal level. You can ask questions and stuff, but if someone's teaching you how to program that way, it's like, it's a little awkward, like you can do it. And I'll say, like, I'm also guilty of that, where like in the conventional way, you just make slides and you show code samples and slides and things like that when you do that face to face. But once you move to an online centric educational model, you could have a interactive platform that will show you what happens, right? You can have a code sample that runs as you look at it, and that you can mess with, and it does something. I think that's very effective. So you saw this with Apple when they introduced Swift, and they had like this Swift playground where you had a 3D game, and as you mess with the code, the 3D game updated live, and you could kind of see exactly what was happening. Like, oh, let's play with this slider for gravity, and you could kind of see what happens. And I think that's just so powerful. And being online, being on a digital device enables all of that. And so you got to make use of that, and not just be like, well, here's the slides, I'm going to go over this in a Zoom session, and then I'm going to email you the slides, and then we're done. Right. You want to make something interactive. You want to make a platform, but of course that also takes time. But it's something that we're working on.
Yeah, I think there's like nothing more mind blowing for a non-technical person. I've like witnessed this a few times, which is when you show them like inspect on a web browser, and you just like go to the New York Times and you change like the H1 title for the headline of the New York Times, and it's just so mind blowing, like seeing it and just like change in front of your eyes, and just knowing that you're yeah, you're just like editing some code and it changes the output. And there is so much in this world that with technology, I guess we just like glide along the surface and we never really internalize, they dug up the internet cable outside my house the other day, and I saw inside it, and it was literally fiber. I know it's called fiber, but it was like, it literally just looked like fiber. And I cannot wrap my head around that. I really cannot. Like, so, but just an example of, yeah, sometimes when you do get to kind of peek behind the curtain in that sense, it can be so empowering, even if you can't do anything with it yet, just to understand how, that there is something that makes this work.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that's just a really cool aspect. So yeah, when say you send a transaction and you do a contract interaction, you can show people like, oh, here's the transaction and here's the block was included in, and this is the state change it led to on the chain. You can visualize these things, and I think that's just very powerful, instead of just having like some hexadecimal code on the screen. And it's like, you just gotta imagine that in your head. That's kind of the thing. Like, great composers, they can see sheet music and you can just hear the music, but that's not for everyone, not everyone can just see some hexadecimal numbers and be like, oh yeah, that's amazing what happened here. Most people are going to look at that and like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. And it's funny you mentioned New York Times, because I think that they do a decently good job at adapting the content for the medium as well, right? When you have a newspaper, you print it out. It's print, it's static, right? But then sometimes you'll see articles that are actually interactive. So they might have, say, a map of the US, and they say like, look, this is the progression of some particular thing that happened, and there's a slider and you can move it around and everything moves, and you can click on a state and it'll zoom in and it'll show you information, and then there's the content that goes along with it. Those are the kinds of things that I think are amazing, and that's something you should really think about when you're adapting content to a medium that's the internet or some other platform.
Yeah, that's so funny that you said that about the New York Times, because I don't know if the term is storytelling. No, stories. No, oh no, I've forgotten what it's called. But basically, I saw those articles that you're talking about on the New York Times, and I became obsessed with that like kind of functionality. And I was in GitHub repos, I was on CodePen, and I was like looking, scrolly telling, I think it's called. And so like when you scroll, the story unfolds and it changes. Yeah. And so, but yeah, to me, it was so impactful that I just, as someone who isn't like wildly technical, I'd say I'm like technical literate, but not a builder. But it really pushed me into, really piqued my curiosity, and it made me want to learn so much more, because I just felt, oh, wow, this is like the first time that this is how a story maybe is meant to be told on the internet, on a web browser. And it was so much fun, and it was so engaging. And I think, like you said, that's the potential with online education. And then on top of that, blockchain is such a interesting and innovative space compared to maybe traditional subjects, that it kind of adds another layer of complexity and interest to how that all turns out. So
you can see how that activated you so much already to see these kinds of articles, right? So blockchain, it is very new, and they're very complicated subjects, and it can be difficult to sort of get that to a level where you can explain it to people that have nothing to do with it or have no technical background. But that's just exactly what it is. Like to go back to the hexadecimal numbers, say when you do an NFT transfer, you can show like, here's the transaction and then here's the state change. Or you can have a visual where that's interactive, where you're writing some code, and then when you trigger an NFT transfer, you see a few characters like, here's Alice and here's Bob, and the NFT goes from Alice to Bob, and it just moves. It's just interactive like that. Everyone can understand it. That's just so powerful. And then these are the kinds of things that you need to really get this to like a broader audience, because even though the technology can be pretty abstract and pretty foreign, the concepts behind them, what you're actually doing, you're transferring ownership of something, and this is what that looks like. And then once they get that, you can have them do a deep dive and be like, well, this is how that unfolds on the chain actually, and then why it is the way it is again.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a really interesting space to be in, to see fundamental ideas like ownership, identity, trust, and value. And like you just, I love that word that you use, activate, in terms of talking about education, because that really, it creates like a visual of like a superhero activating or something like that. But it's just like awakening something dormant in people, which is like those ideas, like just like the concept of ownership, which we're so familiar with in our lives.
Yeah.
But we don't really have like a fundamental understanding of like what it really means and who is really the owner, and how is that transaction taking place. And so I think that is something that excites me about, blockchain and the education space, activating people in that way to think about things that they already deal with in real life. So Marvin, I wanted to ask you one, maybe like a final question or just a reflection, which is, what is kind of one experience that you've had with your time in this space that has made you, I guess it's been like heartwarming, made you optimistic about the future, whether you witnessed it or participated in it, those moments where you're just like, wow, I'm really glad I'm here.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Like, you can think of so many small instances. It's really like an ongoing process where heartwarming things happen like almost on a weekly basis, where they invent something new or they're empowered to do something specific. But what I personally like, not even directly related to just technology, but the fact of connecting people to the right people. So I've had a student at the school that I taught. He was actually part of Kernel as well, and I showed him about this. So he's passionate about the crypto space, and he always wanted to get into it. And he's been doing a lot on his own, and being decently successful at what he's doing. But he was sort of like, how do I take this to the next level? Yeah. And just like meeting people like that and finding that, and also being able to do something for them. So I said like, hey, I know this thing called Kernel, you should take a look at it, and if you're interested, I can you can throw your hat in the ring. I can forward your name. And yeah, in his words, he said that was life-changing to him, to be able to meet all these people and have these connections. And that's really heartwarming to see, to have people kind of come back to you and be like, wow, this really changed my life. How they got in there, or they got something done like that. And that's just really fun, like making that difference, connecting people together. And I've happily, humbly done that for people, and also people have connected me. So I would not be where I am if it weren't for the people that I met as well. And I think that's just something, it happens everywhere, but in the crypto space, you can really see this, where people are united in this passion about the promise of decentralization, and they will find opportunities to make that happen, and find the right people and connect them together. And then, once the right people get together, magic happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really wonderful. And I totally relate to that story, and kind of how life-changing just connecting with like-minded people can be.
It's really, and I call those small things, but because like it's a big thing, but I call them small things because it's a singular moment where suddenly that happened, and that can change the course of everything. And to give another practical example, I know a lot of people who are now very interested in getting into crypto space, and they think it's all magic, and it's highly complicated stuff, and there's no way they're going to get into this. Even if they're seasoned developers, they'll need years to get into it. And I say well, let's just sit together and we'll write a smart contract together, and we'll go through this idea. And that takes a couple of hours, half a day. And then at the end of it, their mind is just blown. And they're like, wow, I had no idea, I didn't know, they didn't know where to start. And then if they have someone to just kind of sit with them and go through it, suddenly it all becomes clear. And then they take that to new heights. And the week after, they're like, hey, I made this smart contract. You want to take a look? And you look at it, and it's fantastic, it's, wow. And it kind of, those are the moments, like where a singular instant can suddenly change a lot. And of course, people have done that to me as well, where they introduce me to a concept and I'm like, wow, this is mind blowing.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Marvin. I know that you were up so early this morning, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to talking again at some point.
That would be wonderful.
Really fantastic project. Appreciate it.